Here's a headline that kind of shocks you a little bit. In Common Dreams, 94% of prepackaged and homemade U.S. baby foods contain toxic heavy metals. Now, this is on top of a different study that came out previously about other kinds of baby food that said a similar thing. So let me run through this for you. We have a quote here. FDA must go beyond the baby food aisle and set strong standards for these contaminants, said the National Director of Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. Almost all of the baby foods that parents in the United States feed their children, whether purchased at the store or prepared at home, contain detectable amounts of toxic heavy metals that can impair brain development, according to new research published Thursday, which led to renewed demands for improved regulation. So, in other words, the previous study said, look, all of the pre-made baby food has 95%, 95% of the pre-made baby foods have toxic metals in them. And people said, it's okay. What if it's like the ones that I make? Well, those ones also have 95%. So in other words, even the raw, like the ingredients, when you then put them together to make your own, you still run into the same problem. It's like, Jesus Christ, what are we doing here? A previous study by Health Babies Bright Futures found that, I think I'm supposed to say Healthy Babies Bright Futures, found that 95% of prepackaged baby foods, is what we just discussed, tested were contaminated with toxic heavy metals, including lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury, sparking a congressional investigation and conversations about whether homemade baby foods are a safer alternative. In an effort to determine if homemade purees and foods purchased outside the baby food aisle have lower heavy metal levels than pre-made, store-bought baby food, the donor-funded Alliance of Scientists and Nonprofits recently tested 288 foods and examined more than 7,000 additional food tests from published studies. HBBF, quote, found no evidence to suggest that homemade baby food has lower heavy metal levels than store-bought brands. Lead author Jane Houlihan, the Alliance's research director, and Charlotte Brody, its national director, wrote in their newly released report, heavy metal levels varied widely by food type, not by who made the food. And so here's what they say. Here are the key findings. So 94% of all food samples we tested contained detectable amounts of toxic heavy metals. 94% of store-bought baby food and 94% of homemade purees, however you say that, and family brand food. Rice cakes and crisped rice cereals are heavily contaminated with arsenic. They contain higher levels of inorganic arsenic, the toxic form of arsenic, than any other foods tested. Both stand out as foods to avoid for children and adults. So rice cakes and crisped rice cereal. Axe 'em. Lead, arsenic, and cadmium levels are high in some fresh carrots and sweet potatoes. Wow. The 10 most heavily contaminated foods consumed by babies, beginning with the highest, are rice, crisped rice cereal, rice-based puffs, brown rice, rice-based teething biscuits and rusks, white rice, raisins, teething crackers, granola bar with raisins, and oat ring cereal. So the 10 least contaminated are bananas, grits, baby food brand meats, butternut squash, lamb, apples, pork, eggs, oranges, and watermelon. The takeaway from this is so obvious. It's so obvious. You need better regulation. They go on in this article to give some details about the way the regulation works, but suffice to say, it ain't enough. It ain't good enough. The other thing is, you need... I don't know if this is the case for baby food specifically, but you got to bust up these monopolies because they're part of the problem as well. And this is an area where you want increased competition. You want higher standards from the FDA. You want lower prices, higher quality. And just the fact that to have a headline like this, to have a story like this, to have a study with results like this, what are we doing? Are we poisoning a whole generation because of our lax standards? Is that what we're doing? So, look, they absolutely need to change this because this is unconscionable. But it also makes you think, well, what the fuck? How poisoned is everything else that we're talking about, you know? How poisoned is every aisle in the grocery store? Let's wrap this article up here. They say Mark Corkins, chair of the Committee on Nutrition for the American Academy of Pediatrics, considers Thursday's study to be a logical follow-up to the one that the HBBF conducted in 2019. after which many experts encourage parents to switch to homemade options. So they said, hey, this baby food's bad. Do homemade options instead. Now we're learning, well, the homemade options are just as bad. Great. With the publication of its new report, HBBF has come back and said, we sent shoppers into all sorts of stores, and guess what? The food you're making it from is high in heavy metals as well. The source is going to be the same no matter what, he continued. It's going to be farms and produce grown in dirt and water. That's the same dirt and water that the other produce is grown in. In a statement released in response to the report, the AAP reiterated its call for swift, comprehensive federal regulation of heavy metals in foods that babies eat. In the meantime, the group added, families can reduce exposure by feeding babies a variety of foods. So that's all they say is like, hey, we need more regulation. And also, if the more variety you have in the diet of your baby, the better off your baby's going to be. Because if they keep having one product that's perpetually contaminated with way too high levels of heavy metals, that's a problem. The House Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy revealed last February that leading baby food manufacturers are knowingly selling products tainted with dangerous levels of arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. Knowingly. Heavy metals that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the World Health Organization have declared a human health hazard, particularly for infants and toddlers who are most vulnerable to their serious, often irreversible, and sometimes deadly effects. To date, however, the FDA has set limits for heavy metals in just 2 types of baby food, infant rice, cereal, and juice. The agency's Closer to Zero plan identifies steps the agency will take to reduce exposure to arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury from foods eaten by babies and young children to as low as possible. Okay. But they go on to say the FDA is moving at a snail's pace to take meaningful action. And look, that's under a Democrat. The second a Republican gets in there, they'll be like, you know, all that talk about the increased regulation and toxic metals and the kids' food, blah, 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 axe it, done. Because they'll cut the budget. They'll cut the budget for the FDA. They have, you know, political axe to grind with the FDA. It's an ideological disagreement, and they'll say, we don't really believe in what you're doing. Somebody like Ron Paul wants to abolish the FDA, right? And so we'll go back and forth on that. Knowingly selling products tainted with dangerous levels of arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury, because to make an extra buck, the companies will keep selling it. So, there it is. No matter how careful you are, looks like capitalism catches up with you, doesn't it?
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.